Alright, Travis Winggood, so let's do the 3 passion plays from 3 different religions. We'll start with the oldest one and work our way to the one everybody knows, so that you can see how it merely copied the original. You have to go to sacred-texts.com to find the Battle of Horus, the Battles of Horus. It's number 8 in Roman numerals. The full link is /EGY/AEL/AEL11.htm. This is the English translation from the Greek papyri called the Chester Beatty Papyri. There are several sites online that will provide you the Greek texts. Some of them will provide you a transcription of the Greek so that you can clearly identify which Greek words are being used. And then some give a partial translation. The Sacred Text site gives the full thing out for you, so you don't have to mess around trying to find the PDF version that'll give you what you want. And so, background of who Horus is. Horus is the son of Osiris, who had to flee into the wilderness when Set had murdered his father. There were 2 particular deaths, and different authors tell versions and variations. For example, the second death, some say that it was 42 pieces that his body was chopped up into to correspond with the provinces of Egypt. And then others, the more predominant one is just 14 body parts. The 14th body part goes missing, and so Horus was fashioned from the created extra piece, eaten by a fish, which has symbolic significance as other cultures down through the generations tell stories about fish. 2 fish, specifically, not just Dr. Seuss. 1 fish, 2 fish, 3 fish, 4, or more. Can't remember the title exactly. And so, it was in the 363rd year of the reign of god Ra Horakti. That's a syncretic conjoining of different gods into one. It's Amun originally, but the particular version is from the Greek of the 3rd century, and so it's 300 to, wait a minute, no, the 1st century is 0 to 1, so yeah, 200 to 300. Right? Yeah. Gets so confusing. Because there's no 0 year. And so, yeah, it also depends on whether you're saying 100 AD or the 1st century AD, because different. Alrighty, anyway. And there was a great war happened between Horus and Set. So Set takes over the kingdom after murdering his brother, and The concept of the sacrament comes from this. The sacrament of the Last Supper. Oops, I'm already giving it away. Because the temple rituals are set forth for the washing, anointing, and passing by the judgment scales, and then before the veil of the temple in the Holy of Holies, where you then have to show that you've passed the judgment and are written in the book of life, so that you can enter into the presence of the God in the Holy of Holies as an eternal God yourself. And the joys of being hairy in the nose. And so the commemoration for the Egyptians was to bring offerings to the temple, hand them to the priests. Priests go before the altar in the Holy of Holies, and they bless it with hymns and prayers, and then they take a portion of the offerings, the food and the drink offerings, and give it back as blessed to the Egyptians who came to the temple. Thus, the bread and wine for the Last Supper sacrament. I have to say Last Supper sacrament because Mormons understand it differently than Catholics. So, because Catholics have other sacraments. So, just so that it's understood. And then, and so the purpose of receiving a portion back is that Horus is conceived with the gathering from around the world of the 14 pieces representing the house of Israel. And you're saying, wait a minute, there's 12 tribes of the house of Israel, Travis. No, there's 13, because Joseph gets a double portion, Ephraim and Manasseh. And then you're saying, but that's still not 14, Travis. Jacob the usurper renamed Israel for that specific reason, had a daughter, Dinah, who was raped by the Shechemites, and they then had them circumcised. The brothers had them circumcised so that they can then slay them for raping their daughter, their sister. And so, women are different from men in that they're missing something. And most women don't really miss it. But if you're going to have a baby, you're going to need it plugged into you. If you understand what I'm referring to. And so yes, that's the missing part of Osiris. And Isis his wife had to fashion that so that she can get pregnant and have the heir to the throne conceived in her womb as she flees into the wilderness, so that Set doesn't murder her and the child, because Set knows that a child would ruin his chances of maintaining the throne. And so you gather the house of Israel together back to the temple, and there you are internalized the body and blood of the Christ, Osiris, in remembrance that Horus will one day come to take back the throne and restore peace and harmony and order in the universe. And so it's the Egyptian people in whom the child will come through in the generations. And thus the whole purpose of the Last Supper is that of the latter days and the Messiah to come. And so the contest is when he's all grown up, it's the latter days, and the battle commences. First it's violent. Horus's right eye is plucked out for the first day of 3 days of darkness. His 2 eyes are considered the word Peter, which in translation into English is seer. Any of this sounding familiar? It should. It's the origin of all religion, and is what Joseph Smith was trying to restore for the Mormon Church until a certain assassination occurred and a certain assassin who ordered it took over the throne just like Set did. But let's see. It's kind of long, and I don't really want to read it to you because there's lots involved here. Now, the second encounter in the north, but the last great battle was not yet. And now, at last, Set himself came forth from his hiding place. Fierce and savage he is, cunning and cruel, in his nature like a beast of prey, without ruth or pity. And men make his image with the head of a wild beast, for human feeling is to him unknown. From his hiding place he came forth, and he roared terribly. The earth and the heavens trembled at the sound of his roaring, and at the words which he uttered, for he boasted that he would himself fight against Horus and destroy him, as he had destroyed Osiris. So that gives you the English theme that the translator used from the Greek text. It started out with the fighting, and then they became a petition before the court of the Egyptians called the Ened court, with Amun as the head of the court. So they're the ones that were involved in the pre-mortality, setting up the council in heaven. Yeah, Joseph Smith knew something, didn't he? And then they're the ones on earth, being the judges, and then in the afterlife, in the Amduat, the netherworld, they're also there to judge the dead, to see whether they become celestial beings of the sun, or if they're pigs that go back into the netherworld to wait for another resurrection. It's amazing, and yet, nonetheless, Mormons don't want to be Mormon. Horus wins all the contests. He wins everything, but it still was insufficient for the judges to say, okay, you win. they favored Set the whole time, and it's literally like Pharaoh saying no, but we're not there yet, and I just gave you more clues of what's next. Because this Sunday begins the Passion Week. And this is where it originated from, is this Set versus Horus battle. Set loses in the end, at least by the judgment. He lost everything. He just got his butt kicked. He had no ability to withstand him. Similar to me versus President Russell M. Nelson, if you saw that video series. Anyway, he wins by the same story in the Bible, with Jacob giving a bowl of porridge to Esau and then stealing the blessing away also. And then Esau complains and says, "You are rightly called Jacob, the usurper, because you stole my birthright and then you stole my blessing." And so, yeah, the naming of Israel is to make the promised latter-day Messiah come through Israel, Jacob, instead of Esau. As Esau went and married Judith from the Philistine evils in their temple, and Judah had a son, Jacob had a son named Judah, of whom the king, the latter-day Messiah, would eventually come through, as he's supposed to be a son of David, of whom came through Judah as well. And so, yeah, instead of the porridge, it was actually a salad with special sauce. And yes, Isis was behind all of those, just like Rebecca was to Jacob, helping him. And so it's a twist on the Egyptian version in the Genesis story, but that's where it comes from. So yeah, that's the Egyptian version. And so then we go to the plagues of Egypt during the Passover Passion Play of the Jews for Exodus. And it's technically the whole house of Israel, but only the Jews celebrate it for some reason. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints want nothing to do with it, as they're all about the Easter Jesus and his Passion Week, which is next. So the plagues of Egypt, Moses emails, he mails it. He doesn't have the email to the Quorum of the 70. He mails a letter to the 70, and informs him that he's coming to take back the church. And so the 70 changed the Wikipedia page to say that if all the prophets are no longer available to run the church, then hypothetically, or deductive logically, the 70 would then take over. No, they wouldn't. But yeah, Brigham Young changed it so they think they can under such a circumstance. But he goes into Egypt, goes to the temple where the throne of Pharaoh is, and says, "Let my people go. I'm their leader. You are a false Christ." And Pharaoh says, no, just like in the Egyptian story. And so the first plague is turning water to blood. And this isn't a supernatural event that occurs. I don't understand why there are biblical scholars who try to create some kind of thing to justify it. It's the inundation of the Nile River, guys. Hello? The mountains in the southern Egypt melt. They then flood the river, and it's called inundation. They take the red soil from the mountain regions and sweep it down into the black land of Egypt, which is why it's called Kemet. The T is the feminine plural, it's feminine singular plural for the land, as Chem is the word for Ham in our Bible. Ham is incorrectly pronounced. It's Chem from the Egyptian. And so why they had to add in Mitzrayim to be Egypt, I don't know. Take it out. It's not even the form of an Egyptian or a Hebrew word. And so, I mean, it's got the eam at the end, but it's still no. So take it out. It doesn't exist. And so then you have to say, well, yeah, Ham got all of Egypt. And then you say, well, who got the part of Egypt? Not Ham. The other, so frustrating. But yeah, there's anyway. But this flooding of the Nile River every year for inundation comes from the creation story of the Egyptians, which is in Genesis chapter 1. The waters separate, dry land rises up, which also again corresponds to the birth of a child who is supposed to take over the throne in the latter days. Same exact story. That's why Noah, he comes through the lineage of Seth. Cain kills Abel, and instead of Cain taking over the kingdom and Noah being born through Cain, I forgot to tell you that. The special sauce salad that Seth ate impregnated him, and he gave birth to the branch. If you're familiar with that in your Old Testament prophets' explanations. And that comes from the first death of Osiris, where he goes to, or the coffin sails up the Nile into the delta, and yes, the triangle is the personification for the woman's nether regions. Are you going to be upset if I say vagina? The cuneiform script is composed of vaginas and penises. And so the triangles are the vaginas and the sticks are the penises. That's how the ancients wrote the language. And so yes, the delta of the Nile turns red with the onset that it's time to have babies. And all symbolic. If you don't think so, you'd be wrong. Because it's all tied together in translation. You cannot separate things out of translation. They're all considered together. And so, yes, Moses starts it off, water turns to blood. I am he who is prophesied from the Nile inundation. And step aside, Pharaoh. And so then you get the frogs, and then the lice and the gnats. Frogs technically are the ones that eat the lice and gnats, which means they must have killed off the frogs to allow the lice and gnats. But regardless, that's all part of the creation process. Wild animals and flies, or flies? No, guys, and flies. And then the pestilence, it's not locust. It's not until locusts or the grain. But yeah, the grain, it's all a cycle. The dry land emerges from the inundation of the Nile, and then planting season now begins, and they're able to follow the Horus star in the sky, Sirius, to identify that it's time for the flooding and the planting season and all that. They use the stars to determine when it's time, and that was the first clock. And so after you plant, then the animals come in to eat the plants, and then man comes in to kill the animals and eat the plants. That's the process. That's what you see in Genesis chapter 1, is that natural yearly cycle of how things work. there in the Nile Valley. And so here you're seeing a little more extreme of plagues, the flies and the lice and gnats and the pestilence on the livestock, boils, no, I won't go into it. But then we get something else that's outside of the realm of this natural cycle of the Egyptian river. And you get hail and stars falling from heaven, fire falling from the sky. And you see this with the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. Fire from the sky destroys Sodom and Gomorrah. That's where this came from. It's the same storyline, and it's referring to the latter days, as stars are supposed to fall from the heaven, and there's supposed to be a great hail, and so that's where they got it from. And then you get the locusts, which destroy the crops. And so technically they're somewhat out of order, but nonetheless, that's the way it was written. But then we have another one outside of the Nile River, 3 days of darkness, 3 total solar lunar eclipses, or total solar eclipses. The sun shall be darkened. And the only other place of 3 days of darkness, other than the crucifixion of the Christ and the Book of Mormon, is, the Book of Mormon. 3 days of darkness, total solar eclipses. They don't happen 3 days in a row. They're 3 total solar eclipses for a time frame. That this is the time frame for the latter days of when the battle will begin and when it will be ended, when the millennial reign of peace will then commence, as Set is chained at the end of the Egyptian narrative, just like in the scriptures, the New Testament and the Mormon scriptures. Set will be bound during the millennium, chained, the chains of hell. That's where all that comes from, is from the Egyptians. But yeah, these 3 days of darkness give us the date, and yes, even the day and the hour. Sorry guys, if you believe Matthew, after Matthew already himself gave you the actual day and the hour. Oops. If you're going to continue to believe his words and not his actual signs giving you the date, that's on you. But astronomy is a science and gives us the day and the hour. I've shown you those days and hours. And so the 3 days of darkness are symbols of death. And so yes, the final death, Jesus is crucified, dies on the cross. Even though the symbolism is all wrong, it's not the way it's supposed to be done, blah blah blah. Nonetheless, that's the symbol for the Roman period version of the story. Samson, the Sun King, as I've gone over with Paleo Hebrew with you, he dies on the end. All 3 stories are discussing the 3 days of darkness, and the dates for the 3 days of darkness according to the signs in the heavens. So yes, the lion, Delilah, and the final death of Samson, all portrayed in the heavens for this period of 8 days. Passover comes from this Exodus and consists of 8 days for the celebrating of the holy day. starting on the 28th of this month, going till the next Sunday. 8 days. And that's why it's told to us in the story of the Exodus. And so, what's the final one? Death. But that's part of the 3 days. But the death here in the Exodus account is the death of the firstborn birthright blessing son. Remember, Esau has his brother Jacob the usurper usurp his birthright and blessing and takes it over for him instead. And then you have Pharaoh loses his birthright blessing son, which in the Egyptian world is how succession for the government and the religion takes place. That's completely different in our American days, because we have religion and government separated, though sometimes religion seems to control the government, and vice versa, but nonetheless, they're separated. And so we're not looking for an exact match, because the 3 days of darkness of symbolizing death and collapse are a time period of 8 years, as they celebrate 8 days for their passion play, from birth to the beginning to death at the end. So the first year you would expect to see the sign of the Son of Man being born. Not his actual birth, because he's not an 8-year or 7-year-old when he dies and somehow magically reigns on the throne. No. These are the signs in the heavens that are being referred to, and correspond with the Egyptian battle of Horus against Set to take back the throne and have a millennial reign of peace with Set bound. I've gone over in other videos, and I'll just bring it up here again. Set in Hebrew, Paleo-Hebrew, is Satan when he becomes king, usurping the throne from Osiris. That's where Satan comes in. So in Hebrew, they only understand it as the adversary, but that's where it comes from, is Set, of whom Noah is born through. And again, the flood of Noah, the waters separate, the dry land appears, the Ark of the Covenant of Noah is on top, because the Ark of the Covenant goes in the Holy of Holies. That's where all this comes from, guys. And this is why after 8 days, the male child who is born is then circumcised, for this exact reason, to expose the crown of the penis. And that's the plagues of Egypt, the passion play of the Exodus. And then we go to Holy Week timeline. I got Learn Religions as the site I'm going by for this, rather than trying to go through the scriptures for you, because they do a pretty good summary of it. They go over all religions, it looks like. They've got East Asian section, Abrahamic and Middle Eastern section, Indian section, other beliefs in religion, and so this one's the Christian one, obviously. I wonder if they even think about Mormonism. I'm not going to check. But learnreligions.com. Holy Week timeline. Day 1. This Sunday, the 28th of March. is Palm Sunday. This is when the Messiah comes back to Jerusalem, in this story, riding on a donkey. I think it's a jenny ass, or is it a jackass? Because there's another one of David riding on either the jenny ass or the jackass, and it's supposed to be comparable, but the animals are mixed up in your Old Testament to New Testament. Donkey, well, that's different than a ass, and it's unbroken colt. So, alright. So yeah, I had put in the footnotes to reference to King David when he was riding on one. I hadn't checked to see if they approved it, but in the footnotes, remember, because you all watch all my videos, right? All 2,000 plus, to know what I'm talking about. But this is the palm branches, and there's lots of Hebrewisms in here that you need to understand Hebrew to understand the symbolism. And they're shouting Hosanna, praise Yah, or Yosana, praise Yah, son of David, and Yah, Prince of God, as Israel is supposed to be defined, Nelson. You should have known this. But anyway, on Palm Sunday, the disciples and he spend the night in the house, the kingdom house, in Paleo Hebrew, with the N at the end of it. Beth is house, and then the N is for kingdom. So the kingdom of Beth, the kingdom of the house. A town about 2 miles east of Jerusalem. They treat it like it's a history. It was Constantine who declared where all these sites were to be, when all this is the latter-day prophecy, retold from the original Egyptian. Let's see, Lazarus is raised from the dead. Oh no, this is where Lazarus was raised from the dead, so he doesn't do it here. And then his 2 wives, Mary and Martha. That's what the early Brighamite prophets were saying. He was married to both of them, along with other wives. And so the next day, on Monday, which, alright, so on Monday, the 29th of March, Jesus becomes the whipper. Whip it good. Crack that whip. Yeah, he clears the temple, cleanses it of the money changers who are using the temple to make money. I guess Jesus didn't want them to pay tithing for the purpose of temple worship. And so that's day 2. Day 3, Jesus goes to the Mount of Olives and bleeds. Again, that's from Osiris, who bled for us and died for us, that he would care for us enough to die for us. Oh, it is wonderful, wonderful to me. Yeah, there's a mixing going on here between Osiris and his murder with Horus, who's supposed to take back the throne and restore it, but fails in the Gospels accounts. And so this is also the Mount of Transfiguration, where he gets the keys from Elijah and Moses. I wonder when that happened for the Mormons under Joseph Smith, Because certainly that can't be the key. Moses' key can't be for the first presidency. Certainly that's only for missionary work. Because Peter, James, and John are not the missionaries of the 12. They're the leaders of the church. Right? Isn't that how it's supposed to be, Mormons? Nelson had his picture taken at the statue of Peter with the keys as he's trying to take it from him. These are mine, Peter. I rule the church. No, Moses, the temple, section 110. That's why it's connected to the Exodus and the gathering of Israel, the coming forth of Horus, the last days Messiah. So nobody knows what was going on Wednesday, the day of silence. So day 4 is silent. Day 5, this is Jesus saying, I'm Horus, I'm the guy, as the Last Supper commences. And Da Vinci tries to tell us about the bloodline of the Holy Grail, that it's supposed to be a physical offspring of mortality who's supposed to come and restore the kingdom of God, just like the Knights Templar of Friday the 13th and Monty Python and the Holy Grail and the Killer Bunny. Yeah, all of that's legitimate. And also the Egyptian treasure plates buried in the ground in America at the crossroads of the first and third total solar eclipse, Southern Illinois. Didn't Joseph Smith say something about finding buried Egyptian treasure plates and about the coming latter days that he needed to build the mountain cities of Zion and New Jerusalem before then? Oops, I hope it's certainly not before now that we're supposed to have Zion and New Jerusalem built, because we're in trouble, aren't we? So, yep, there's that. And then day 6, he's sold out by the Utahns, phonetically the same as Judah, Judah. That's why Esau married Judith, and Jacob had a son named Judah. Interesting. I wonder if the guy who beat the Mormons to Congress to get it called Utah instead of Deseret knew of this and knew that the Mormons were the prophesied evil, great and abominable church. I wonder. And so, yeah, he's betrayed by Judah, sold for 30 pieces of silver instead of 20 pieces of silver that Joseph was betrayed by Judah and the other brothers for. And he's not given a trial. It was pretty much a sham. They violated every law of the Jews in his trial. So if you learn anything about Jewish law, and then you look back at the gospel narrative, you realize every law was broken. And so, yeah, very similar to when the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints retaliated with my petition for a redress of grievances by having me disappeared indefinitely, which ended up being only 6 years, but nonetheless, no trial, no hearings, no conviction of guilt, nope, just an order telling the government to have me disappeared. So yeah, I know all about this. And then he's raised up on the Egyptian Ankh for eternal life, which in the Roman period has to be described as a cross that he's nailed on. And so, again, this is the story during the Roman period. And they have to tell it in that form because that's what people know. but the original one is Osiris. After he was dead, he was prepared, mummified for burial in the tomb, and then he, after 3 days, was resurrected from the tomb, and then he ascended into heaven, as it's portrayed with the Egyptian Ankh, and becomes a solar deity like Amun. And so that's where the Gospels narrative goes into that on day 6. And then the crown of thorns, because they're mocking him. But also thorns is the Paleo-Hebrew symbol of the delta, which is also a pyramid. So they're using an alternate translation of the delta symbol. And the nails, the 9-inch nails, those were the nails nailed into his coffin for the first death. And Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. And then he gasps his last breath and dies. You do not kill me, I kill me. And then day 7 is in the tomb, which is Osiris in the tomb. And notice it's Joseph of Arimathea, isn't it? No, not. It is a Joseph, though, isn't it? Yeah. Okay. Oh, Nicodemus, was a member of the Sanhedrin. Wait a minute. Hold on. Is it Nicodemus who buys it? Because Joseph of Arimathea, that's the father-in-law who's a son of David. I think it's Nicodemus. Yeah, purchased by Nicodemus. Yeah. And then day 8, he is risen. This is Osiris again. They're mixing it up. But the concept is that Horus is supposed to have conquered Set, chained him for the millennial reign of peace as he restores order and harmony for the new millennium. And that's where all this comes from. So, there you go. Did the Mormons catch their version that they're supposed to have? So, okay, gotta change the laundry anyway. So, perfect ending.